What's one thing a doctor told you that you've never forgotten? Story 1. Wasn't to me, but I was in the room because I was accompanying my mom to all her appointments. Her surgeon basically told her, "You're right, there is a problem, but we can fix it," and it caused her to burst out in tears of happiness. She'd been dealing with abdominal cramping and pain for going on 10 years, started mild, and had gotten progressively worse to the point where, when it would hit, she would be in tears, hunched over, unable to eat or move. A bunch of doctors had diagnosed and treated her for a bunch of things that did nothing for the pain, and eventually most had told her to get a psych eval because it was clearly in her head. Finally, she convinced a surgeon to do some kind of exploratory surgery with a camera. Turns out, it wasn't in her head. She'd been born with a condition where her large intestine wasn't attached to her abdominal wall the way it was supposed to be. Over the previous 10 years, it had moved in such a way to coil around her small intestine, her appendix, and her colon, and was starting to cut off circulation and cause cell death. They ended up removing something like 6 to 7 inches of her large intestine, her appendix, and a large part of her small intestine. Just like that, all her abdominal pain was gone. Story 2. My wonderful doctor was doing a biopsy in a very sensitive area and asked how my pain was during. I said I was okay because I have a high pain tolerance. She said that still doesn't mean I have to be in pain. I had genuinely never thought like that before. Story 3. You, sir, have the veins of my dreams. Come look at this man's veins. Nurses then proceed to argue about who was going to take blood from said veins. Story 4. I told my doctor my knees crunch when I bend them. Showed him what I meant and he said, "Wow, that doesn't sound very good," and then left the room. Appointment over. Story 5. I was generally an anxious crying disaster during a papiopsiad post-baby lady parts process of nonsense. I apologized for being a mess to my male OBGYN and his med assistant, who had both in my eyes gone to pretty great lengths to calm me down and talk me through the pain, anxiety, etc. I feel pretty comfortable with these humans, as it's the same team that delivered both of my babies. He says if I accomplish anything in this career, I hope it's that I can get women to stop apologizing for how they react to having to deal with all that they have to deal with. The same doctor had also said to me, when I was facing a few different reproductive scenarios, "I will do whatever you want me to do. It's your body. My job is to answer your questions, give you the facts, and when you make your decision, I will have your back 100. He has done many things for me to improve my outlook and to help me learn to advocate for myself in our garbage healthcare system. But those times really stick out to me. I compare all other doctors to him. Story 6. I was dying from a ruptured ovarian cyst, and when I woke up after surgery, my surgeon showed me photos of the blood he drained out of my belly and said, "That's the most blood I've ever seen. I'm surprised you're not dead. Want me to email you these photos?" I did want them emailed, and I still have them. Story 7. He brought his office staff in to talk to me. I had just quit drinking and she was a recovering alcoholic herself. She was so supportive and compassionate. I needed to hear things from someone just like me and it really helped. Been sober since 2001. Story 8. This is silly, but I went through some different stuff as a kid, and I had just seen a documentary about a few serial killers that made me scared of myself, as they had went through similar things as me, and I was young and thought I might snap like them. She said that I was too empathetic to ever do such a thing, and that kind of reassured me that I wouldn't be a bad person growing up. Story 9. I was only 7, but I had horrible fever, stomach pain, and vomiting for 4 or 5 days. My mother and dad finally took me to the hospital. I couldn't even get water past my lips without vomiting it up. Of course I was dehydrated. The pain was relentless. I writhed in the bed, moaning and crying. They put me on IV and they x-rayed me for hours and days trying to find an obstruction or something. I stayed in the hospital for 4 weeks. Total, lost half of my body weight. They had even told my parents I might not make it if I couldn't start eating. One morning, I woke up, I looked at my mom and said, "I'm hungry." You should have seen her face, split into smiles of joy. Whatever I had was over many years later thought to be an unknown variety of virus. They sent me home and a week later we had a follow-up with the doctor. He patted me on the head and told my mother, "Your daughter was obviously faking, and the next time she comes home complaining about a stomach ache, get a switch after her and send her back to school." My mother slapped him. I promise I am not making the story up. It was 1972. Things were different. I always thought he was so pompous he didn't want to admit he didn't know. Story 10. When I was 14, I thought I might have an eating disorder because I was obsessing over my body and food. I went and saw the doctor and he grabbed my belly, pinched it, and gave it a good shake and said, "I don't think you've got an eating disorder, you've still got some meat on your bones." You can guess what that did for my eating disorder. Story 11. I had terrible life-consuming acne as a teen. Dermatologist was a family friend and was retiring. He told me an antibacterial bar soap like Safeguard or Dial, and cold water and friction is better than any kind of drug, cream, or astringent that a doctor will suggest. I tried it. My face cleared up completely within a month after a decade of socially crippling acne. Stopped my hour-long face cleaning rituals. Absolutely changed my life and helped me get my kids through puberty without their faces exploding like mine did. Edit added a hyphen for my cannabinoid consumption consultants. Story 12. I always have to be careful how I talk to her because she doesn't know her husband's sterile. Makes you wonder where the 2 kids came from. Probably shouldn't have told you that. Now open wide, let's have a look at those tonsils. Story 13. I had a mole on my ear. Surgical removal was minor. Doc said it was likely nothing. Then he called to say it was melanoma and it was deep. Come back in. Second surgery was a bigger deal. On a table, music playing, he marks the ear and the nurse said, "That much?" But he was a good surgeon and you wouldn't notice. Then he calls a couple days later to say, "Big question is what to do next." I said I thought it was over. "No," he said. "I told you it was deep. We could remove half your face, but it might not do any good." And so, for 2 months, waiting for an appointment with an oncologist, I thought I was going to live with half a face or it was too late for that. The oncologist was chill and said, "No worries, wait and see." And he was right. 30 years later and I'm still fine. Story 14. Dentist. When speaking about stress headaches. You know your teeth are only supposed to touch when you chew and sometimes when you yawn, right? Nope. Thought they touched all the time. Story 15. After pressing me about why I don't want children while seeking an IUD, you should have at least 1 child to reduce your risk of breast cancer. Thanks, but I'll take my chances with the cancer. Story 16. I had an ectopic rupture for my first pregnancy. After explaining the fastest roads to take to the hospital for emergency surgery to my husband, he took a moment to gently hold my hand and say, "Okay, we're going to go save your life now." He was the greatest doctor I've ever had. I'll never forget how calming his voice was even while I was actively dying. I'll always be grateful to him. Story 17. I was 6 weeks pregnant with my first child. At my first prenatal visit, the doctor checked the opening of my pelvis. His words, "We could back an 18-wheeler in here." He seemed quite pleased. I guess he wasn't wrong as I had a 10 lb baby vaginally with no problems. Story 18. Your uterus is very pretty. Oh, just like your mother. You have a cyst on your left ovary, even nearly the same size. That he said while my mother was in the same room, because back then I was too anxious to go on my own doctor appointments. By my gynecologist who also is my mom's. Edit pretty not petty? He actually really meant it as a compliment. Like when my dentist said my wisdom teeth grew very well. Some doctors just really don't know that SMTH sounds inappropriate, but they do mean well. Story 19. Even though I tell him not to, my husband puts his Volvo key in his ear to get wax out. Said right after looking in my ear and presumably noticing scratches from my car key. How did she know it went to a Volvo? Story 20. Finally reached a breaking point at around 24 and went to an emergency psych program thinking maybe having someone yell at me would get me to get it together. Or maybe I'd be sent away and wouldn't have to deal with anything anymore. The combination of having someone explain that wanting to not exist my entire life wasn't normal, and the genuine shock from doctors that I had never turned to self-medicating with drugs was wild. I'd always just kind of assumed I was being whiny and was a loser, and having someone just sincerely validate that feeling so bad wasn't actually normal and was a medical problem was kind of life-changing. Had a lot of other revelations while getting treatment. Had testing done, and it turns out my brain doesn't produce serotonin at anything resembling a normal level. I wasn't a bad person. I was just sick. Story 21. A doctor after I had emergency surgery with complications due to stage 4 endometriosis that I had no clue about. You've got a high pain tolerance. That means if something is annoying, you need to go to the doctor. Your annoying is a normal person's 10. Edit a word. Story 22. I used to suffer really badly from throat infections and was always at the doctor. An old retired doctor I met told me if I took antibiotics, it would be gone in a week. If not, it would clear up in 7 days. I've avoided unnecessary antibiotics for my throat ever since. Story 23. I had my appendix taken out when I was 15. The doctor said it was an easy surgery due to the thin layer of fat. 30 years later, I would definitely not get the same compliment. Story 24. After a freak and devastating chest infection, I was coming out of sedation, on a ventilator with a feeding tube and still unable to speak or even lift my arm much, from the surgeon inching out the drainage tubes in my chest, but by bit every day. So you have all this time in bed. What language are you going to learn? Sir, I'm going to watch the entirety of Parks and Rec and sleep a lot. Really just shows you how different people are wired. I'm glad the insane overachievers were part of my medical team, but I will never be one of them. My family still laughs about it. Story 25. Best case scenario, you lose your foot. Worst case, you bleed out before getting to a hospital. I just had my ankle rebuilt. The surgeon wanted me to understand how important it was that I not put any weight on that leg. At all. For 3 months. Never forgetting that one. Story 26. That the lump under my arm would go away by itself. Went to a different doctor who cut out a marble-sized malignant lump, treated with radiation, and my case was put in the medical books, according to my oncologist. I was 19. Story 27. I don't know much about insert medical area of concern, so I'm going to refer you to a specialist, but now I want to learn more. The reason this stuck with me particularly is because when I went to see him a couple months later for a follow-up, he seemed almost as knowledgeable about the topic at hand as the specialist I had seen. I wish he were still my GP. Story 28. We sometimes see the symptoms you are experiencing in patients with leukemia. They took a ton of blood tests. It was a Friday. Longest weekend of my life. I did luckily not have leukemia. Story 29. Your blood can save lots of lives. Give blood all the time. 0. And I do whenever I can. Luckily, my workplace gives benefits for donating blood. So win-win. Story 30. I went to a new dentist because I needed a cleaning and had horrible pain in my tooth. They gave me the cleaning, prescribed me some fancy toothpaste, and said there was nothing wrong with my tooth at all, but the toothpaste was just to make me feel better. A few months later, I went back to the doctor because, again, horrible tooth pain. By a stroke of luck, he was out of the office and another dentist looked at me. She listened to me, took x-rays, and saw I needed a root canal. A few weeks later, I'm back for the root canal and the first dentist is the one doing it. He said, "How long have you been in pain for?" I said, "Years." But no dentist would ever listen to me. He had the gall to say, "Well, I'm glad you're here now because we always listen." I wanted to slap him. I told him so many times and he never listened. It literally took going to a different dentist for anyone in his office to listen to me. I got the root canal and then switched to a different dental office where I once in passing mentioned some pain and they immediately listened to me. Story 31. You have a very mean mother. My brother had a sore throat, so Mom looked at the back of his throat and said, "There aren't any green spots. You can go to school." By the time he came back, the entire back of his throat was covered with a white fuzz. Apparently, strep causes white growths if untreated. Story 32. That I was being dramatic and needed to calm down. Had emergency surgery a few hours later to get a cyst and ovary removed. That doctor. Chewing tobacco. I had a Navy dentist tell me I chewed tobacco. He spotted the thickened area just under my lower lip. He told me to keep it moving around because sitting in one spot increases the chance of cancer. Saw him chewing tobacco himself in port a few months later. Story 33. That I should consider termination if I couldn't handle normal morning sickness. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, was in the ER for the 3rd time that week, for fluids, and it was a Catholic hospital. My next pregnancy was devoid of morning sickness and HG, but I did lose my mom unexpectedly. My doctor cried with me when I told him they'd known each other their entire professional lives, but he didn't know she was my mom until it affected my care. Story 34. I cut myself pretty bad on my left index finger trying to open a coconut, and my girlfriend at the time took me to the hospital at like 12:30 a.m. When the doctor asked what had happened, and I explained, he said no knives after midnight. It's a pretty good rule, which I'm sure he had plenty of experience with. Story 35. You lost a leg in a serious vehicle accident. Good thing I don't remember a single thing. I was so up on painkillers that my first thought was, whoops lol. Story 36. They told me I needed permission from my then-boyfriend to make a decision about a life-saving hysterectomy, just in case he wanted babies someday. It was a female doctor. I still kind of want to punch her in the ovaries. Story 37. My dentist telling me I had plaque buildup in one spot, and I needed to put more effort into cleaning it, or it was going to cause problems. And I said, but it's really hard to get floss in that area though. And he paused for a second and said, well, the plaque doesn't care. Made me realize how often I talked about objective reality, like I was trying to convince a manager to give me a policy exemption. Story 38. Our pediatrician told us to just stop. How do we wean our daughter off a pacifier? Just stop giving it to her. How do we transition her into not swaddling? Just stop swaddling. It's crazy how uncomplicated her advice was when everywhere around us we are swamped with parenting advice. Her biggest point was that kids are resilient and they get over things easy. Sometimes it's US parents that overcomplicate the process or think everything is traumatizing. Story 39. My mom thought I was anemic when I was about 10. The doctor said I wasn't and that Anna will always be pale and interesting. Thanks, Dr. Green. Story 40. I was a really bass hypochondriac when I was late teens, early 20s. I went to the doctor because I was convinced I had a brain tumor. He said I can see it now. Your tombstone? Here lies my name. First person to die of a sinus infection. I wanted to throat punch him at the time. Story 41. I was 4 months postpartum and dealing with a bad adrenal fatigue issue, and the doctor told me, well, I can see you haven't lost the baby weight yet. and proceeded to blame my issues on that. Story 42. That I am terminally ill and that I could die any day. Being told I'm terminally ill is one thing, but being told that any day could be my last is disheartening, especially when I have been told this by 5 doctors. I have been living like this for almost a year, every day, wondering if it will be my last. I feel too horrible to live it up like every day is my last, and now, I'm just waiting for it to all be over. Story 43. To me, an aerospace engineer. You clearly do not have the mental faculties required to understand the nuance of running a medical practice when I questioned him why he was 3 hours late, after no call, no showing me the previous day, after he was 2 hours late the month prior. Story 44. It had only been 6 months since my mom passed away. I was at the doctor's office and she had asked about my family history. I told her about my dad's side and then mentioned my mom. She paused for a brief moment and she said that she had just lost her mother too. Ironically, Mother's Day was a few days away and it was going to be the first one without them. We were both able to share our grief in that moment, and before I left she asked if it was okay if she gave me a hug. I had felt so numb up until that point, but I left that day feeling like I wasn't completely alone. Story 45. This was a nurse, but I was at my 28-week prenatal appointment and she straight up told me to watch my weight because I was gaining too much. I was 98 lbs underweight when I got pregnant and 125 lbs at that appointment. She suggested a 1,200-calorie diet. I always thought that was such a weird appointment. Story 46. Doc. In a serious voice. I've looked at your test and it seems you have Gilbert's disease. Me, 15-ish. Having never heard of that? Oh, what does that mean? Doc. It means that you tested high for bilirubin. Me? Okay, and what does that mean? Doc. It means you'll test high for bilirubin. Me, so. Are there any symptoms or anything? Doc. Just testing high for bilirubin. Could have saved me a few mins of stress with a simple, you tested high for bilirubin, but that's not a problem instead of, you have Gilbert's disease there, Doc. I still test high for it. My wife coincidentally does too. Both of us are still fine. Story 47. That obesity is a disease and not a failure on my part. Just reframing it and speaking to me kindly about being overweight instead of being disgusted or condescending was so helpful and motivating. I didn't feel like it was something I'd never be able to overcome. I just needed treatment. Not necessarily medication, but going to the gym is treatment. Story 48. That I had to accept that the old me was dead, and I would never be that person again. Really hard to hear. Took me ages to understand what she meant and more years to accept it. Story 49. A doctor told my daughter that her disability was a good filter. That is, her friends will be true friends because they'll not be deterred by her differences. Edit severe Tourette's. Edit. I don't believe the physician, a renowned neuroscientist, would mind me mentioning his name, since he is in the public eye. Dr. James Leckman. Story 50. I was talking to a gynecologist about my horrendous periods. He interrupted me and told me women bleed less than a 14 cup. Spot the first day, light flow the second, and spot the third. Then done. Cramps are all in my head. We were done. Story 51. That cyst could be cancer. It should come out. Doc talking to another doc on phone about my young son outside the exam room with the door open. He had not told us yet, but we could hear him. Then stood in doorway and said, "I'm going have a colleague come talk to you in a little bit," and walked away. Story 52. I used to have a customer that was a cancer specialist, can't remember which area. We were really close and he was fairly brilliant in his field. Upon his retirement at the party, I asked him if he had any regrets about the field he had chosen. He replied, "Only one. All my clients are dead." Note. I know for a fact that he still had a few living clients at the time of his retirement, but considering how many people that I knew he had treated through the years, I certainly can feel his sentiment. Cancer sucks. Wasn't sure to add this addendum because it will always burn in our minds. But we lost our son, our only child, to brain cancer 6 years ago. It's truly the worst thing you'll ever go through. Sigh. Story 53. Just cut out soda, junk food, and get more exercise. In relation to my sudden weight gain at 15, I was eating less than 1,200 calories daily and walking 4 miles to from school for 2 years on top of the weightlifting at school. I still had a lot of fat on my belly, thighs, and he flat out called me a liar before running any tests. Oh, I'm low functioning on my thyroid, but not so low you'll prescribe me pills? That's cool. I'll just be low energy and more fat. Same problems even approaching 40. Low thyroid, but never low enough to get medication. Thanks, United Healthcare. Story 54. I've have lots because of all my health problems, surgeries, hospitalizations. One time I was in the ICU, damned near dead, and the IV access team was trying to place a PIC line. The guy couldn't get it. He tried and failed several times before giving up. During one of the tries, he was frustrated and said something about me having deep veins. As I lay there, floating in and out of consciousness, I mustered up a, "You calling me fat?" Anyway, the tech gave up and they sent in a new team. As he was leaving, he went up to my husband to apologize. The tech actually started crying because he felt so bad. Story 55. Doctor told me, I can't have a specific genetic condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, short EDS, because it's super rare, and he has already one patient with EDS. Different doctors confirmed what I suspected in the meantime. 1 in 5,000 people have EDS. That's not super rare in my thinking, but okay. Story 56. I went in to get an STD screening at my university's clinic. The doctor did the whole checklist about partners and acts. He had a snarky, judgmental answer after every answer I gave. I never went back to that clinic again. I went to Planned Parenthood instead, even though I had to pay there and it was free at the clinic. Story 57. Knee surgeon explained how knee cartilage is like the rubber on a tire. It wears over time. One of the worst exercises you can do is squats with heavy weights to wear out that rubber. I could keep doing squats as I was and see him in 5 years for a full knee replacement, or stop and see him in 10 years for a partial knee replacement. Stopped doing weighted squats that day. Knees are solid 10 years later. Story 58. When I was 14 or 15, I was in the hospital, and a neurologist I'd never met, probably the neuro on call at the time, came into my room. She picked up the chart at the end of my bed, looked it over, and looked at me. She then said, "You're fat. That's why you're in pain." My mom practically chased her out of the room while I dissolved into tears. For several years, I'd been dealing with joint pain that had gone undiagnosed up to that point. Over that time, I had gained a little weight because I was having trouble even getting around, let alone exercising. I was barely overweight, but that comment made me feel like a whale. When I was in college, I finally got a diagnosis for my pain, and it had absolutely nothing to do with my weight. I knew that, as I was a normal weight when it started, but I will never forget what that awful woman said. The fact that she was a doctor at a pediatric hospital made it even worse. I can't imagine how many kids she up with her attitude and words. Story 59. You've not been depressed long enough. Come back in 3 weeks. This was after months of crippling depression where a friend dragged me to them and told them this. At the time, I didn't plan on being here in 3 weeks. Story 60. I was a child, under 12, on an experimental medication that caused me to gain weight. The studies had not yet shown that the drug caused weight gain, though. The pediatrician told me that if I didn't lost weight, they would take me from my family, sew my mouth shut, and put me on a liquid diet. They later apologized, gave me a notebook for a gift, and didn't work at that office anymore, LOL. Story 61. As I lay in a hospital bed, not responding to meds that were supposed to help progress my body into labor, a male doctor gave me the most painful cervical exam of my life. I was climbing the bed to get away. He gruffly told me, "Calm down. A baby's gonna come out of there, you know?" "Yeah, but like after my cervix starts dilating, no need to throw your back into this exam." I told the nurse that man was not allowed to touch me again and to please call my doctor and request a C-section. My doctor fortunately obliged. Story 62. To go to the market and buy a big bag of organic apples and just eat those in chicken broth for a whole weekend. I was having digestive issues for a few weeks that I couldn't get sorted. As crazy as it sounds, the apples and broth did the trick. Now, almost 15 years, and 1 colon cancer diagnosis later, I still think about how well that completely reset my digestion. Also, you're too young for a mammogram. Knowing my mom had just had breast cancer. Said to me offhand by a doctor a couple months after my colon cancer diagnosis at the age of 33. Story 63. Germany. German healthcare. 8 years ago, you would have found me in the hospital. My alcoholism and depression had sent me there, indirectly. Broken hip. After my infected leg had refused to work and I had taken a fall in my restroom. It still took 2 more days until my body refused to functioning, except some vital thing. I had a pneumonia. I was short of losing my left leg. I had a beginning liver cirrhosis. I had hallucinations because of sleeping meds and alcohol withdrawal. And I don't know what. I did a cold turkey, and even under medical attendance it was. I spent 6 weeks in hospital, and in the last 3 days the longing for alcohol returned. And I was thinking how to get my loved beer. I couldn't drive. There was, and is, no Uber or similar where I live. I was not married. My mother lived next door, but she would give me and would not have helped me. And on the Sunday before I left hospital, an angel appeared at the foot of my bed. As it turned out, it was the station's medic. She wouldn't be in the next day, so she had decided to come on her free day tour talking sense into me. After she was finished, I cried for 6 hours, and when I finally could stop crying, I decided to give up alcohol, which I did. The sentence, or 2, to be correct, that saved my life. If you continue with drinking where you have stopped when you came here, You are dead in 2 years. And the important one, I want you to live. Story 64. I understand you and we will make this happen. Voluntary tubal ligation a year ago as a childless 33-year-old woman, but didn't question my decision or speculate about my possible desire to have a child in the future or undermine my authority to make decisions about my own body. Told me the facts and respected that I knew what I wanted and didn't take the decision lightly. However, I'm sure it helped that my insurance would pay every dime of the $30K it cost, but I felt heard and seen. Meant a lot. Story 65. I had a gynecologist tell me that my crippling bad periods would go away if I got pregnant. I asked if her office took care of inseminating me, as I wasn't seeing anyone. Also, did my insurance cover daycare? She also remarked that I was a natural blonde after rummaging around in the downstairs. Yeah, complaints were filed. Story 66. Me. High on whatever they give you to roll you into the operating room. To my surgeon. You look like Liam Neeson. Has anyone ever told you that? My surgeon. No, but I have a very particular set of skills. Story 67. A psychiatrist said she would bet her medical license that I wasn't autistic. A couple of years later, I got the autism diagnosis. Sometimes I want to call her, send her my results, and ask her to gently give up her medical license. Story 68. Got prescribed a medication once, and when the doctor was telling me about it, she said, "You'll probably your brains out for the first couple days." I had no idea how to react to that choice of words from someone with a medical degree. She wasn't wrong, though. Story 69. It's a long story, but the short version is, I was admitted to the hospital because I was 11 out 10 on the pain scale around my abdomen, and I didn't know why. They did a scan and found a 9mm kidney stone stuck in my ureter, causing my kidney to backfill and pressurize, which it wasn't meant to do. I was in so much pain that when the DR told me what it was and that they would put a stent in the following morning, I told him to just cut me open and take it out. This was perfectly logical in my pain-riddled brain, but the doctor just laughed at me, which annoyed me. Story 70. A male doctor told me that my panic attacks were because I eat too many hot Cheetos. I stopped eating them for 2 years. To no one's surprise, I still had panic attacks. Story 71. I was living in London, Australia and age 25, during a pap smear with the smallest face towel as a vanity cover, which made me super uncomfortable. The doctor asked me if I had come to London to meet a rich doctor. I looked at the nurse, who was horrified but said nothing, and I burst into tears. He actually looked at me and pulled a sad bottom lip pout at me. After I changed, he said, "Sorry if I said anything to upset you." I never complained. I wonder if it's too late. Still makes me feel disgusting. Kingston Hospital. Story 72. The operation is a 50-50 survival rate. I've got 2 spinal operation on the day of your operation, you and another man. I will operate on him in the morning, and then you in the afternoon. The poor guy before me didn't make it, bled out on the operation table. The doc didn't tell me, but I heard the wailing of his daughters when they got the news. He didn't do my op as he was in shock. So 5 years on, I'm still here with a knackered spine. Story 73. Went in for a medication review for my anxiety depression medication. I was off the back of an abusive relationship and had been working on myself but was still struggling. Doctor told me there were more important things going on in the world, and I didn't have any reason to be sad. I never returned out of fear of seeing that doctor again. It took a near breakdown during COVID and registering for a new surgery for me to speak to someone. I still get nervous when my prescription says, do a review. Good news is that my new doctors are actually really pleased with my progress now and are slowly working to reduce my medication. Story 74. I was in the middle of a C-section and they were sewing me up after extracting the baby. Overheard my doctor and the doctor assisting her having a quietly tense conversation. My doctor sounded very annoyed with the coworker. Then my doctor says, loudly, "Genevieve, do you think you might want another child in the future?" Me, yes. Then she says to the other doctor, "See? Anyways, I'm not sure what they were talking about, but I never forgot it." Story 75. At my yearly checkup, I mentioned my joint pain. My doctor diagnosed me with idiopathic arthralgia. I thought about that, broke it down to its roots, and said, "Wait, did I just come in and say my knuckles hurt and I don't know why?" And you said, "Your knuckles hurt and I don't know why." He said, "Yes, but I said it in Greek." Story 76. Went into a therapist for anxiety and depression. In my early 20s, he suggested I go on a low dose of anxiety meds to help control my multiple times a day panic attacks. Got referred to the person who could prescribe medications, and she told me I should just let Jesus into my heart and my anxiety would go away, while patting me on the knee. Story 77. It wasn't a doctor but a school nurse. I injured my knee out of school and never got it stitched up, even it should have been stitched. The wound started leaking at school and I went to see the school nurse. And she said to me, "You'll never be a model with this scar." I was like 10 years old. Story 78. Had to go to breast cancer clinic to get a lump checked. Many pairs of male and female hands examined me that day. It had been 20 years from anyone other than my hubby had a feel. Multiple times I was asked when did I have breast implants, which I don't have. They are all natural. Hearing my lump was not cancerous was such a relief and my S getting a compliment. Give me a wee boost. Story 79. If only you were 20 years older or male white. Maybe then they take health SRSly chronic, malignant misdiagnosed. Healthcare is designed to treat men, protect companies. Women barely matter. Young POC ones even less. Them, keep at it. She was the first to redo old tests. Boom. Diagnosed, cured, 9-wire health issue. Resonates as I was someone working in science who spent ages pushing for better care only to give up. Watch my health crumble. I was on IV iron, blood after diagnosis, then surgery instead of multiple ER trips AYR. She saved me from an aggressive cancer. Always. Advocate. For your health. That there's a lidocaine cream that you can use if you experience pain during intimacy.